Welcome to another deep dive with us. When you sent in this collection of files and telegrams, I knew we were in for something special.
Yeah.
Declassified FBI files,
hmm
telegrams, and even a handwritten note about a suspicious encounter.
hmm
Today we're diving into the attempted assassination of President-elect Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1933.
Wow.
And even more intriguing, I think we're focusing on the man behind it all.
Giuseppe Zangara. What's fascinating about this case is that we're not just looking at a historical event. We have the chance to step right into the FBI's shoes,
Right.
and analyze their investigation through these primary sources.
Exactly. It's like we have a front row seat to history unfolding.
Yeah.
So to set the scene, it's February 15th, 1933, Bayfront Park in Miami. Roosevelt's just finished a speech. The crowd's buzzing,
Yeah.
and then chaos.
Yeah.
5 shots ring out. Zangara, standing on this wobbly bench, fires at Roosevelt.
Oh, wow.
Now, he misses Roosevelt, but he fatally wounds Chicago Mayor Anton Cermak,
Oh, my gosh.
who was standing nearby and
Yeah.
injures 4 others. And get this, he doesn't even try to run. He's immediately caught, and from the documents, it seems almost relieved.
That's what makes this case so compelling. Zangara practically spills his guts. He's ranting and raving about capitalists, kings, presidents, all the same to him.
Right.
And remember, this is the heart of the Great Depression. Millions are unemployed, struggling to survive, and here's Zangara echoing that widespread resentment.
So is Zangara suggesting his personal anger was fueled by the larger societal discontent?
It's certainly a possibility. His FBI file reveals a man deeply scarred by hardship, forced to work at 6 years old, plagued by chronic stomach pains. Imagine a life of constant discomfort, seeing others living in luxury. That kind of suffering can twist into a powerful rage against the haves.
And killing them becomes the solution. That's a chilling thought. But the FBI wasn't convinced he acted alone, right? I mean, all this talk of capitalists probably raised some red flags.
Absolutely. They launched a full-blown investigation to rule out any conspiracy. There was concern about potential links to Italian anarchist groups, especially after a tip from the Italian consul general.
Plus, there's that unnerving mention of the Easton Post Office bombing 2 years earlier. 3 people were killed. Could Zangara be connected?
They certainly looked into it, and then there's this handwritten note you provided. Just days before the shooting, a man overhears a conversation at a Newark train station that's just dripping with suspicion. They're talking about Miami, California, delivering money, a grand venerable. They even badmouth Judge Alessandroni, whose home was recently bombed,
Right.
possibly by the same group responsible for the Easton bombing.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. We're talking about potential connections to organized crime, bombings, and a mysterious Grand Venerable. Did the FBI ever crack this code?
They followed every lead, interviewed everyone mentioned in the note.
Wow.
But ultimately, they couldn't find any solid evidence to link Zangara to a larger conspiracy.
So we're left with this web of tantalizing clues, but no clear answers. It's like a historical mystery novel. But even if he acted alone, there's still the question of Zangara's mental state. Was this a calculated act of political terrorism or the desperate act of a troubled mind?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the FBI memo showed they were wrestling with this, too. Should they push for a leniency plea at trial? His rambling statements, the fixated hatred, his history of pain, it all muddies the waters.
That's such a complex issue, especially for the time. How was mental illness understood back then? Would they have even recognized what we might consider red flags today?
That's a crucial point. The 1930s saw mental illness through a very different lens. What we might consider mitigating factors today could have been easily dismissed back then.
And how did this all play out for Zangara? Did they ultimately declare him competent to stand trial? So despite all the uncertainty surrounding his mental state, did he actually face trial?
He did, and it was a swift conviction. Zangara was sentenced to death just a month after the attempt. It really makes you wonder if he even had adequate legal representation, given the complexity of his case.
And how did Zangara react to the sentence? Was there any remorse, any hint of regret for what he'd done?
Defiant, unapologetic, he expressed no remorse for the people he actually shot.
Really?
The only regret he seemed to have was missing Roosevelt.
Hold on. He was sorry he missed his target. That's bizarre. Just reinforces how twisted his thinking was.
Yeah.
So how did the public react to this whole ordeal? I mean, attempted presidential assassinations aren't exactly everyday occurrences.
It's interesting the newspaper clippings you shared really capture the public's mood. Fear, of course, outrage, but also a strange fascination with Zangara himself. He became this almost mythical figure embodying the anxieties of the time.
I can see that. Here you have this period of immense economic hardship, social unrest, and then this guy tries to kill the incoming president.
Right.
It must have felt like the world was spinning out of control.
Exactly. One article described Zangara as boastful and defiant in court. Another focused on the heavy security surrounding his execution, painting a picture of a society on edge, desperate for stability. It's as if they wanted to make sense of the senseless, to find a reason, a motive, anything to explain why someone would commit such an act.
But amidst all the fear and judgment, did anyone offer a different perspective? Anyone try to humanize Zangara?
There is one fascinating piece of correspondence in the file, a letter from a man who expresses sympathy for Zangara. He doesn't condone the violence, but he argues that the immigration system failed Zangara. He sees Zangara as a desperate man in need of help who was let down by the very society he lashed out against.
Wow, that's a powerful counter-narrative. Even in the face of this horrific act, there's a voice urging compassion and understanding. It makes you think about how easily we can jump to conclusions without considering the complexities of someone's life.
It's a good reminder that even the most seemingly straightforward cases often have hidden depths. It forces us to look beyond the headlines and consider the social and economic factors that can contribute to such tragedies.
And we've talked about the investigation, the trial, the public's reaction, but there's still that piece of the puzzle that hasn't been fully explored. The mysterious encounter at the Dallas Park Hotel just days before the assassination attempt. I've got to admit that handwritten note gave me chills.
It is quite a curious piece of the puzzle, isn't it? Remember, this newspaper editor who wrote the note had just interviewed two women who witnessed the shooting. They describe Zangara in detail, and then this man who looks just like Zangara approaches him asking about Roosevelt.
And not just any question about Roosevelt, right? He specifically asks if Roosevelt is going to be the train station across from the courthouse where Zangara was being held. It's just too specific, too coincidental to be a random encounter.
Yeah.
Do you think Zangara really had an accomplice?
It's certainly possible. The editor himself expresses his concern, stating his belief that this encounter could be further evidence of a conspiracy. But unfortunately, there's no indication in the files that the FBI ever followed up on this lead. The note itself is undated and unsigned. It might have been hard to verify or investigate.
It's frustrating, isn't it? To have this potentially crucial piece of information and no way to know if it was ever fully explored.
It does highlight the limitations we face when dealing with historical investigations. We're often left with more questions than answers. It's like a detective novel with the last few pages ripped out. But these unanswered questions, these tantalizing hints, also make history so fascinating.
So looking at the FBI's overall approach to the case, do you think they were thorough? Or do you think they might have missed some crucial clues?
It's tough to say. They were operating in a different time without the resources and technology we have today. Remember, there was no DNA analysis, no sophisticated surveillance techniques. It's possible they focused on the more immediate and tangible aspects of the investigation.
Or maybe they dismissed this note as the ramblings of an overexcited editor caught up in the drama of the moment.
That's also a possibility. We'll probably never know for sure. But even these unanswered questions can be valuable. They force us to think critically about the information we have, consider different perspectives, and accept the fact that we may never have the full story.
I think that's a crucial point, especially in our current age of information overload. It's so easy to take things at face value to accept the official narrative. But the Zangara case reminds us to stay curious, to dig deeper, to question everything.
Absolutely. And that's the beauty of history. It's not a static collection of facts. It's a living conversation, constantly evolving as we uncover new evidence and re-examine old assumptions.
So as we sift through these documents, these fragments of a life and a pivotal moment in history, what do you think is the most important takeaway for our listener? What can we learn from Giuseppe Zangara and the attempt on FDR's life? It strikes me that Zangara's story, despite all its twists and turns, really boils down to a clash between individual suffering and societal forces.
That's a great observation. His case forces us to consider the complex interplay between personal demons, political ideologies, and the social and economic realities of the time.
And it's not just a historical curiosity, it raises questions that are still relevant today.
Absolutely. Think about how we grapple with mental health issues, political extremism, even the challenges of immigration. Zangara's story, though set in the 1930s, has echoes in our own time.
It's a stark reminder that these issues haven't gone away. We're still struggling to find solutions.
And that's where the value of examining these primary source documents really shines through.
You write these raw, unfiltered pieces of information, the memos, the telegrams, the witness statements, They transport us back to that moment.
We see the event through the eyes of the people who lived it. We feel their fear, their confusion, their attempts to make sense of this shocking act.
It's like we're piecing together a puzzle, but with some pieces missing.
Exactly. And that's the nature of history. They rarely get the full picture, but in that ambiguity and that struggle to understand, we find deeper meaning.
It reminds us to question our assumptions, to be open to different perspectives. There's rarely one definitive answer.
And that's so important, especially today. We're bombarded with information, with narratives trying to shape our understanding of the world.
But the Zangara case teaches us to be critical thinkers, to dig deeper, to challenge the easy answers.
To look for the nuances, the contradictions, the human stories behind the headlines.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the mind of Giuseppe Zangara, what's one final thought-provoking question we can leave our listener with?
Given what we've learned about Zangara's troubled past, his fixated hatred, his chronic pain, if he were alive today, how would his case be handled?
Would we see him as a dangerous criminal or as someone who desperately needed help? Would we recognize the warning signs or would he slip through the cracks of the system?
It's a question without easy answers, but simply asking, it forces us to confront our own biases, our own assumptions about mental health, about justice, about the very nature of good and evil.
You know, this whole experience has been like stepping into a time machine. We've walked in the footsteps of FBI agents, we've felt the pulse of a nation on edge, and we've grappled with the enduring mysteries of the human heart.
And through it all, we've been reminded that history is not just a collection of dates and facts. It's a mirror reflecting our own humanity, our own struggles, our own search for meaning in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable.
That's the power of the deep dive. It's not just about learning about the past, it's about using the past to understand the present, and perhaps even shape the future. Thanks for joining us on this journey, and we'll see you on the next dive.